At 6, an inquest finds police failures contributed to the deaths of 2 women murdered despite repeated calls to the police. Raneem Aude and her mother Kaula Salim died at the hands of an abusive former partner. Their family criticised West Midlands Police.
West Midlands Police have failed Kaula and Raneem beyond imagination. They had so many opportunities to save their lives.
The force has apologised and said it'll learn from its mistakes. Also on the programme, a man has pleaded guilty to murdering a 35-year-old law graduate in East London as she walked home from a night out last summer. A last-minute U-turn by FIFA just 2 days before kick-off, and beer has been banned for fans in stadiums at the Qatar World Cup.
I don't think it necessarily bodes well, given that they've had 12 years to think about these kind of things and they're changing it so last minute.
I think people will be more upset at the U-turn than not being able to actually drink.
And I'm here in Salford on the stage of Children in Need 2022, where final checks are underway ahead of tonight's big fundraiser.
On BBC London, councils are facing tough choices as one leader warns of significant cuts to spending. We take a look at what it'll mean for the capital's most vulnerable.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The aunt of a woman killed by her estranged husband has accused West Midlands Police of failing her beyond her imagination and says she hopes her niece's death is a catalyst for change. An inquest jury has found that errors by the force materially contributed to the deaths of Raneem Aude and her mother Kaula Salim. They were attacked in Solihull by Raneem's estranged husband in 2018. He's serving a minimum of 32 years in prison for their murders. West Midlands Police has apologised to the family. Our correspondent Phil Mackey was at the inquest in Birmingham. You may find details in his report distressing.
Raneem Aude on the left and her mother Kaula Salim were the victims of domestic violence, a mother and daughter badly let down by the people who should have been protecting them.
West Midlands Police have failed Kaula and Raneem beyond imagination. They had so many opportunities to save their lives, right up until the end. Both were murdered while on the phone to the police begging for help.
Days before the pair were murdered, a court granted an order preventing Jambaz Tareen from going anywhere near his former partner. But this is him following her on a night out. There was a row. You can see Raneem's mother intervening. Then she made a series of 999 calls, but no one came.
Police emergency, what's the location of the emergency? Well, hi, I just called the police about more than half an hour ago, and actually I'm in danger. My ex-partner came and he actually harmed me and harmed my mom as well.
The last call came later as she was being attacked and she and her mother were screaming.
I felt like they really empowered the perpetrator rather than helping the victim. Along the way, my sister, she lost hope. Slowly, she started not calling them as much as she was before.
This was Tareen being arrested a few days later. He'd been making threats for months, but despite repeated calls, the police never made an arrest.
In a statement, West Midlands Police said it should have done more to protect the women from a campaign of domestic abuse and apologised to their family.
The family said they hoped the women's deaths would be a catalyst for change.
The Independent Office for Police Conduct carried out its own investigation. It said that 9 officers were served with misconduct notices, 5 of whom had management action taken against them. The other one was given some retraining. Meanwhile, the force says it's added resources to dealing with domestic violence, set up a special unit to review investigations, so it hopes things like this doesn't happen again. Sophie.
Bill, thank you. A man has pleaded guilty to the murder of a law graduate killed as she was walking home from a night out in East London last summer. Zara Alina, who was 35, had just begun working at the High Court. Jordan McSweeney, who had only recently been released from prison, also admitted sexually assaulting her. Helena Wilkinson reports from the Old Bailey.
To her family, Zara Alina was independent, big-hearted and a joy. A law graduate, she'd started work at the Royal Courts of Justice in London and was the happiest she had ever been. But in the summer, her dreams, her life ended. She was murdered by a stranger intent on finding a woman to attack. That stranger was this man, Jordan McSweeney. He'd followed Miss Alina as she walked home. He dragged her onto a driveway and sexually assaulted her. She died from multiple injuries after being repeatedly hit and kicked. Today, at the Old Bailey, McSweeney pleaded guilty to murder and guilty to sexual assault.
She was attacked while walking alone on a residential street. She had every right to be there. She had every right to feel safe. But instead, she was the victim of shocking violence.
At an earlier hearing here at the Old Bailey, the court heard that McSweeney had 28 previous convictions for 69 separate offences. When he murdered Zara Alina, he was out on licence, having been released from prison less than 2 weeks earlier. McSweeney will be sentenced for the brutal and savage murder of Zara Alina next month. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
With just 2 days to go before the Men's Football World Cup gets underway in Qatar, football's governing body FIFA has banned the sale of alcohol to fans inside the stadiums. It's a last-minute U-turn on a deal signed with Qatar in 2010. Budweiser, which had signed a multi-million-dollar deal for rights to sell its beer at the matches, says there's nothing it can do about it. From Qatar, here's our sports editor, Dan Roan.
The Qatar World Cup had already been shifted to winter. Today at the 11th hour, another unprecedented shift of the goalposts. Having told fans that beers would be available at stadia in a country where alcohol sales are tightly controlled, local pressure led to a late U-turn. In a statement, FIFA said, following discussions between host country authorities and FIFA, a decision's been made to focus the sale of alcoholic beverages on the FIFA Fan Festival, other fan destinations and licensed venues, removing sales points of beer from Qatar's FIFA World Cup 2022 stadium perimeters. Budweiser, which pays £63 million to sponsor the World Cup, tried to make light of the situation in a now-deleted tweet, but they could take legal action, and this evening fans already here were unimpressed.
I don't think it necessarily bodes well, given that they've had 12 years to think about these kind of things and they're changing it so last minute.
I think people will be more upset at the U-turn than not being able to actually drink.
Just 24 hours ago at a legacy event in Doha, the man responsible for delivering the World Cup told me all was on track.
We're ready, the team's ready, the operational team is ready, everything else is going on. We've always talked about football beyond the stadiums. The players are here, everybody's here, the excitement for the World Cup is coming along. You know, we've always talked about the World Cup being a platform to bring people together, a platform to push forward progress for change and so on. This is what it's all about.
But today's U-turn is just the latest controversy to hit an event that was meant to be the perfect advert for this immensely rich Gulf state. Suspicion marring the build-up ever since FIFA voted for it 12 years ago. Despite extreme summer heat and no footballing history, the hosts denying allegations of corruption. But no matter how implausible it may seem to so many, the first World Cup in the Middle East has arrived.
Just as Doha has risen from the desert over the last 30 years, no less dramatic has been the way that a host of new stadia and huge amounts of infrastructure have been built for this groundbreaking World Cup, one that the hosts hope will elevate the status of their country. But it's the human cost of such colossal investment that's brought with it unprecedented levels of scrutiny.
Thousands of migrant workers have died in Qatar since 2010, and while organisers insist very few are due to working on stadium construction, campaigners say official data isn't reliable and recent reforms don't go far enough. Today, a vocal critic of the tournament told me how he felt about being here.
So there's kind of queasy feeling around it at the moment. You know, there are significant issues around this World Cup, obviously, with human rights issues, what's happened with the building of the stadiums and workers' rights and homophobia. Well, I think it is tainted, and because of that and other human rights issues.
But current players have had their say too. Both England and Wales among a number of teams who'll wear armbands as part of a non-discrimination campaign in a country where being gay is illegal.
I think any gay fans coming here would be safe. Sadly, some of our fan groups, Three Lions Pride, most of the members have decided not to come. That's their personal decision, but we have repeatedly asked for assurances that gay fans would be safe here, and we understand they will be.
You've had the reassurances that you need?
Right from the top of the country, yes.
Qatar wanted this World Cup to cement its growing financial and diplomatic links with the West, and it's been stung by some of the criticism. Others, however, fear football's showpiece is about to be used. Rarely has the build-up to this event felt so divisive.
Well, insiders here say that today's dramatic beer ban U-turn is due to the hosts in this conservative Muslim country wanting everybody who attends matches to feel comfortable. And they make the point that beer will be available at plenty of other sites throughout the city. But I do think it adds to the sense of unease ahead of Sunday's big kick-off and the uncertainty. It raises certain questions. What kind of welcome will visitors receive here? Who's in charge? FIFA or Qatar? And what exactly will happen over the next few weeks when it comes to this very delicate balancing act that the hosts have to tread? Perhaps today an early sign of a potential clash of cultures. They're getting ready here for an influx of more than 1 million fans on a scale they've never had to deal with before, and the pressure is on and the eyes of the world is on Qatar.
Dan Rowan, thank you. The UK has entered a new era of higher taxes, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It said that middle earners were set for a shock with taxes going up and prices soaring. The Chancellor has admitted that families will face real challenges, but said the measures he announced yesterday would help to tame inflation. Our economics editor Faisal Islam reports.
Swindon the day after an extraordinary autumn statement. Even at this networking meeting of women entrepreneurs, the historic middle-income hit is apparent to all in this squeezed Swindon.
It's just scary, really. Me and my husband both work full-time, and our disposable income is shrinking month by month. Our mortgage has gone up, childcare costs gone up, food bills, obviously energy bills.
In terms of the pound in their pockets, most people will be worse off in the coming years. This shows how the impact by 2028 of tax and benefit policy changes since a year ago differs. Adding the policies before yesterday in blue and from the autumn statement in yellow, middle to high earners were the hardest hit by changes to tax and benefits. Those in the poorest households, earning around £13,000 a year, stand to be a few £100s better off by 2028. The richest households, with an average income of £135,000, will be more than £2,500 worse off. But those in the middle, earning between £35,000 and £42,000, will be between £350 and £600 worse off, a significant proportion of their incomes.
People on average earnings, maybe they're earning 25, 30, even £40,000 a year, they're going to be feeling a lot worse off over the next couple of years. Prices are going up, their earnings won't be going up in general as fast as prices.
Good to see you again.
Visiting Swindon after a set of forecasts that depict an historic economic challenge and constraints that could last years, the opposition top team making a rather big claim.
The Labour Party, under my leadership, is the party of sound money. We would make different choices. I don't hear anybody in our movement, trade union or otherwise, or actually across the country, that can accept for a moment that it's fair to go again after working people.
There is a key question in the back and forth between the main political parties. Can the opposition, currently riding high in the polls, diverge far from the plans outlined yesterday by the actual Chancellor, whose plans were today backed by the IMF?
The measures that we announced yesterday will make the recession lighter. It'll mean that around 70,000 jobs are saved. So I think that will give people confidence that, yes, this is difficult, but there's a plan, we're going to get through it.
But some economists and union leaders urged Labour not to even accept the premise of a borrowing black hole so they could spend more on things like public sector pay. Do you fundamentally accept that there's a 2% of national income consolidation required, about £50 billion?
Well, look, I accept that they've done huge damage to our economy, not just in the last 12 weeks, but over the last 12 years. And we will come into government and we will have to face that challenge.
The baseline you accept?
Well, we accept that because of the errors of this government, that we are in difficult
Economic Times now. The argument we have is not with the Office for Budget Responsibility. Our argument is with the government that they've made the wrong choices.
So while their methods may differ, the government and opposition accept the same starting point, that there are £55 billion of tax rises or spending cuts required to repair the public finances. Shared tough choices for a tricky future. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Swindon.
Meanwhile, the government's been criticised for its decision to delay the introduction of a cap on the amount people will have to pay for their social care in England. Our social affairs editor Alison Holt is here with the details. Alison.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, the government is trying to juggle finding money for a care system that has record staff vacancies and faces a crisis right now, against long-promised reforms to help families in England who can face huge care costs, for instance, providing support for someone with dementia over many years. Well, last year, the government set out plans to introduce an £86,000 cap or limit on the care costs a person could face over their lifetime. At the moment, only those with savings or assets of less than £23,250 are eligible for council care. The reforms would have increased that threshold to £100,000, allowing people to keep more of their money. But those plans, due to be introduced next October, are now on the back burner for at least 2 years. And that has a human cost. Paula Connor is living with the twin problems facing the care system in England right now: finding care and the cost.
It's been very, very tough, and I'm a tough person normally, but it's destroying me. It is.
Her 89-year-old husband Mick has dementia. He was stuck in hospital for 4 months as she struggled to find a good care home with a place. He's moved into one an hour away. It costs £65,000 a year, eating up savings set aside for both their retirements.
£65,000 a year. It won't last more than 2 years at the most. I don't not understand why, when you've worked hard all your life, you have to pay. All right, a small contribution maybe, but these kind of fees are just terrific. And then, of course, when all that goes, what do I live off?
We will fix the crisis in social care once and for all.
Fixing social care was a key promise made by the Conservatives, with the cap on care costs central to those plans. Sir Andrew Dilnot, who devised the policy, says he's astounded by the delay and the need for reform is urgent.
We have a system that is creaking, that is falling apart, that is putting enormous pressure on the wonderful people who deliver the care, as well as the individuals who need the care and their families. It's hard to think of a more vulnerable group than people in that position, and our system is something that we should all be ashamed of.
The government says the delay frees up money to help provide more support for older and disabled people right now. But these are reforms that Jeremy Hunt argued for before he became Chancellor.
I do believe in those reforms that Andrew Dilnot has championed very much. But in the end, this 2-year delay means that we can increase funding available to local authorities by £4.7 billion over the next 2 years. That's the biggest increase we've ever had in social care.
For Paula and other families, more help now is vital, but so is a plan for the future. Alison Holt, BBC News.
And there's plenty more analysis on the impact of the autumn statement, including analysis from our political editor Chris Mason about the political battles to come. You can find it all on BBC News online. That's bbc.co.uk/news. You can also get there by using the BBC News app. The time is coming up to 6:20, our top story this evening. An inquest finds police failures contributed to the deaths of 2 women murdered despite repeated calls for help. And coming up, the game-changing drug proven to delay the development of type 1 diabetes.
And on BBC London, more support with energy bills for households, but residents on a communal heat network say they're missing out. And we hear from one London charity helping young women in Haringey, all made possible by children in need.
They were built to bring gas from Russia to Western Europe. Now investigators say a series of blasts on 2 underwater gas pipelines earlier this year were the result of serious sabotage. Swedish prosecutors found traces of explosives near the pipelines. The explosions in late September in the Baltic Sea, close to the Danish island Bornholm, targeted the pipelines Nord Stream 1 and 2. It comes at a time of tension between Europe and Russia over the war in Ukraine and during an energy crisis. Russia denies any involvement. Our Europe editor Katya Adler has been given exclusive access to the underwater site of the blast and sent this report.
This is a new front line in Russia's conflict against Ukraine and the West. Vladimir Putin has warned energy infrastructure, how oil and gas travel from source to our homes, is at risk. This is why the West believes him. 3 explosions were detonated on major gas lines between Russia and Europe earlier this autumn. Moscow denies responsibility.
Hello, good morning.
We set off in search of answers with exclusive access and the help of underwater drone experts. Look how the concrete casing around the pipe was ripped apart. That, say intelligence sources, would need the force of a huge car bomb.
An explosion or something really just bending this metal, and you can really...
This has been shot up out of the seabed.
Yeah.
We learned the damage was far more extensive than widely believed, but we may never know for sure what happened here. As we filmed, a Danish surveillance plane circled nearby, and also...
We can see a Swedish warship, Danish warship, and also a Russian offshore boat.
Is that usual, this kind of activity?
No, it's not usual at all.
Not usual at all. The backdrop to this sabotage is Russia's war. The countries investigating here are keeping intelligence close to their chest.
So that was ripped off the pipeline itself?
Yeah, at some point I can.
But one thing has become clear from the pipeline debris.
This explosion here in the Baltic Sea has heightened all of our awareness of the importance of undersea infrastructure, but also the huge difficulty in protecting them.
Our energy supplies rely on a spiderweb of subsea pipelines. Also underwater are thousands of miles of internet cables, keeping us connected and enabling trillions of pounds worth of financial transactions a day. You can see how vulnerable the system is. NATO member Norway is the main gas supplier now for the UK and EU. Fears of sabotage and espionage means it's stepped up surveillance dramatically in the North Sea.
Any further disruption of energy is obviously directly affecting European security. We see it as vital to protect it and to provide a prolonged and steady presence.
It's the first time the Navy here has taken media on this patrol. We joined officers investigating a growing number of drone sightings near the rigs. There's been a spate of arrests in Norway of people suspected of spying for Russia.
Political pressure is mounting. Millions of families across Europe fear the coming winter, and governments from France to the UK to Germany want to know they really can rely on Norway's energy supply.
NATO allies, including the UK, are scrambling to improve marine capabilities.
If oil and gas infrastructure is attacked, and as you say, it's so crucial, could it be considered an act of war?
An attack on Allied critical infrastructure could trigger our collective defense clause. An attack on one ally can or will trigger the response from the whole alliance.
Strong words NATO would rather not act on, preferring to avoid military conflict with Russia. But closer to our homes, Moscow is waging non-conventional warfare, threatening our gas supplies, hoping to destabilise Europe and reduce support for Kiev. Katya Adler, BBC News, Norway.
Heavy rainfall across Scotland and northeast England has caused flooding, power cuts and transport problems. There have been major road closures in Edinburgh and Dundee, while the northeast of England is facing travel disruption to rail, road and bus services as well. Lorna Gordon is in Aberdeenshire for us tonight. Lorna.
Yeah, Sophie, a colossal amount of rain has fallen in parts of Scotland over the past couple of days. Aboyne, just a few miles down the road from here, has had more rain in the past 48 hours than it usually sees in the entire month of November. In fact, Network Rail says this is some of the highest rainfall on record in Scotland. It's causing disruption to the trains. There's been localised flooding on the roads, and there are 7 severe flood warnings in place for areas like here in Ballater. You can see the rising floodwaters here where the river has breached its banks. The police are going door to door here at the moment. The flood levels are knee high. They're trying to persuade people to leave their homes to go to rest centres that have been set up, offering warmth and hot food and a place to spend the night. And this evening we are receiving reports that emergency services are responding to reports that a person has been swept into the River Don in Aberdeenshire after trying to rescue their dog.
Lorna Gordon with the latest there. Thank you. Medical regulators in the US have approved what they are calling a game-changing drug for people at high risk of type 1 diabetes. It's the first licensed medication which can delay the onset of the condition. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh is here to explain what's being seen as a very significant development.
Thanks, Sophie. Diabetes charities say this is the biggest advance in the treatment of the condition since the discovery of insulin a century ago. Type 1 diabetes develops when the immune system attacks and destroys cells in the pancreas which produce insulin, the hormone which manages blood sugar levels. The new drug, teplizumab, works by reprogramming the hostile immune cells to disrupt their attack on the pancreas. In trials, it delayed the onset of type 1 by around 3 years. In the UK, about 400,000 people have type 1 diabetes, 29,000 of those are children, and rates are rising sharply. Having type 1 diabetes means a lifetime of checking blood sugar levels and injecting insulin. It's a 24/7 condition and, unless well managed, can trigger a whole range of health problems. So having a treatment that delays its onset is a breakthrough and should lead to even better treatments in years to come.
This changes everything, because now if we can find people who are at risk of developing type 1 diabetes, we can treat them and we can delay the onset of that condition and give them many years before they need intensive insulin therapy.
He just enjoyed everything about life.
Beth Baldwin's son, Peter, was just 13 when he died from a diabetic emergency. The condition had developed suddenly and was undiagnosed. She now works to raise awareness of the early signs of type 1, like extreme thirst, fatigue and unexplained weight loss.
We were in hospital for 6 days and his body just couldn't cope. It was too much for him. The onset of type 1 can be so quick. If you don't recognise it early enough, what happened to Peter can happen to anyone, and we were just really unlucky.
Teplizumab is not yet licensed in the UK, but is going through rapid assessment by medical regulators. Finding those at risk of type 1 who could benefit will require screening through blood tests if this treatment is to be of maximum benefit. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Now it is a big night for the Bear, Pudsey Bear. This year's Children in Need kicks off in just over half an hour here on BBC One. Our correspondent Stefan Powell is on stage in Salford.
Yes, and this is where the magic will be happening, Sophie. Anticipation is building here in Salford. This is where Children in Need 2022 will be showcased. The presenters, Mel Gedroich and Jason Manford and Chris Ramsey, this is where they're going to be taking us through a night of laughter, of surprises, of special guests, especially if you're a Doctor Who fan. If you're a Whovian, then make sure you're tuned in, because you're going to find out who the Doctor's new companion is live on the programme tonight. It is, of course, all about raising money, and the efforts to fundraise have been well underway already. And the context is a bit different this year because of the cost of living crisis. People might not be able to contribute as much as before, but organisers saying they want to put a smile on people's faces anyway, and all that action is going to be happening tonight on BBC One at 7 o'clock.
Brilliant. And this is going to make you smile as well. Have a look at this. A murmuration, as it's called. These are starlings over Rome tonight. They were filmed a short time ago by our correspondent Mark Lone. The birds are on their journey from Northern Europe to Africa for the winter, stopping off for some sleep and probably some olives as well on their way south. Really is quite an incredible sight to behold. Let's have a look at the weather now. Thomas Schaffnacker is here.
I wonder if that means that winter is coming. But you know, today actually it's been all about the rainfall in Scotland. Here's the radar from the last few hours. The amber warning from the Met Office is still in force for the next 3 hours or so, 2.5 hours. The most amount of rainfall actually fell where pretty much the forecast was around Char. 140 millimetres of rain in just 2 days. That is a lot of water, so hence we've got disruption across that part of the country. But for many of us, the weekend's actually not looking so bad. Saturday, we've got some sunshine on the way, and then on Sunday, I think quite a few showers. We'll be in between weather systems tomorrow. This weather system you can see in the Atlantic here, that is heading our way and will be sweeping across the country during the course of Saturday night. This is what the morning looks like. Out towards the west, clear skies for many of us, even a touch of frost in some spots, particularly in Northern Ireland and some southwestern parts of the UK. Here's the forecast for tomorrow. So eastern parts of the country pretty cloudy with this sort of layer of cloud you can see stretching from the southeast all the way to eastern Scotland, and only 7 degrees in Newcastle, but out towards the west, much better weather there for Liverpool and for Cardiff, around 10 degrees. Now this is the next weather front, so it's sweeping off the Atlantic. Behind it, it's pretty cold air, lots of showers. It reaches the Irish Sea around about 11 o'clock midnight, and then basically through the early hours of Sunday, that weather front sweeps out into the North Sea, and then behind it, we've got that rush of wind. So quite often what happens is you get the weather front, and then behind it, the showers follow in behind. So Sunday is going to be the classic mixed bag, most frequent showers out towards the west. Some of them could bring hail, some of them could bring thunder as well. And I think out of the 2 days, Sunday is going to feel the coldest. Back to you.
Thomas, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 6. The news continues here, though, on BBC One. It's time to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.